Welcome to the Liz McMullen Show. I have a wonderful guest on today, Jackson Leigh. She's going to let me call her Jackson. Or is it Miss Jackson if you're nasty? I know.
Good enough.
I know. Bad joke. Bad joke. I couldn't resist. I was, just before we started talking, I was like, ha ha, cheesy bad joke. Nobody's going to know. So starting out with cheesy, actually, let's just get this out on the top. VK Powell wants to know why you make bad decisions.
I've always said I'm going to start a novel this way. I make bad decisions when I'm naked. The implication being that women always sway me. I'm led by my ovaries. All it takes is an attractive or very sweet or very smart, which I find attractive in women. Woman to persuade me to do most anything. And so thus I tend to make my worst decisions when influenced by a woman.
Actually, you even had it in the book. She almost kissed somebody, and she's like, I stopped making decisions according to my ovaries, something along those lines. In Dragon Horse Whirl, the Carling.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I was with her on that moment. I thought about kissing the girl, even though, I just slipped her to the Mickey, which is just wrong. To start in medias res, why don't you, instead of that, can you talk a little bit about the series you have going on, and of course the book that we're going to be talking about today is The Calling.
Dragon Horse War Trilogy is indeed going to be a trilogy, only 3 books. We have a joke among the Bold Strokes authors that Bold Strokes likes to publish 4-part trilogies. But mine is truly going to be 3 books. I departed from my usual genre, which is romance writing, to tackle the fantasy genre. And Dragon Horse War is set in the future, but it's not a future like I think anybody else has really imagined, because the way I imagine it is that we've come to a future that is both green and at the same time still preserves some technology, that we found some way to find peace with those two, and some things have been outlawed and others have not. It's also several hundred years or more than 100 years after what they termed the Great Religion Wars, that the turmoil that we have now between the Western Christian world and the Muslim world, as we see it in the U.S., the conflict that a lot of people see as a conflict, and just escalates to the point where the great religions it's like a world war, but every side it's not countries but religions that make up the different sides, and until all the people that subscribe to traditional religions end up killing each other out, and there's a new era of peace and a collective consciousness that we need to celebrate our diversity, not try to stamp it out and make everybody be the same. But the Dragon Horse War is all about something threatened. There's a series of weather disasters, and so people get unhappy. Food gets short because history shows that when food supplies are short, that's when rebellions happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, like the Roman Empire and also the French Revolution.
Yeah, let them eat cake.
So, speaking of cake, I always like quirky language, and sometimes I frown on myself for using it in an interview. I was interviewing Dorothy Allison, and I said, life isn't all champagne and lollipops. And then she replied to it and said the same phrase, and it didn't bother me when I was recording. But then I was like, oh my God, I introduced such profanity into the conversation. And what you have here is great phrase: fireballs and ice cream. Which I thought was so much fun.
I wanted to use something that was opposites, one of the big things, and when I tackle this world building, is that especially when there was no religion, when you take religion out of the factor, it takes out all the usual swear words that we use, and I had to come up with a bunch of new swear words because people swear. I mean, you make exclamations, and you can't. I couldn't. There was no damnation or hell, or so I had to make up new ones.
That is a lot of fun. Oh my God. That could be like an entire game of some sort. Okay, this is what you would say in modern times, but in this world you can't. So think of something colorful and just like whatever people blurt on the top of, like off the top of their heads. That would be really neat.
Yeah, you can't say, oh my God. You can't say, oh God, no. You can't.
It must be hard, also being a Southerner.
It was difficult. it was very difficult, and at times I would slip, and going back through editing, I would see where I had slipped and put something in there that I had to take out because it's so ingrained in us. Those words that we use, and it was that was one of the surprising things that I found in world building because I'd never done it before, and it's hard. It's very hard, much harder than writing a romance.
It's like you have to draw from what you know, because like I've always been a big history, mythology, religion. I like the documentaries way too much. I used to like the History Channel a lot more before it became the Ancient Alien Loggers Swamp Channel. It's like you have to kind of like, wait for those few moments when it's actually the History Channel when you're watching it. But yeah, I that's why I always get piqued when I'm reading books, whether they're fantasy or whatever world that the author may create. Like I really enjoy it. I guess it's about how people think. Why do people do what they do? Why shouldn't they do certain things? What's the moral compass? What's the underlying theme, or what's something that's acceptable and what's not? And what I thought was really an interesting and hard thing to describe was when you early in the book where Jael, is that how you say Jael?
Yeah,
Jael. She was seeing the council, but the council weren't just one being. It was like an amalgam of all the different incarnations that they had been, and it was, a switch up of gender and race and personality. And I commend you because it's very hard to keep things clear when it's as if each individual is a somewhat blurry image, almost like a double exposure. Like, how did you tackle when you were trying to create this world? Like, what are some challenges that you ran into?
Well, people are people, and so the characters still are basically have the same human tendencies that we have, even though these are supposed to be enlightened people, because they've been living as the collective. They still have the same human tendencies of jealousy and to covet something that somebody else has. They're just a little more enlightened because after they've lived several lives, they can remember. At some point, they begin to remember their past lives. Those that have had many lives, the older souls, and with that comes a lot of wisdom because they remember things that they've lived through, and they remember what it's like to have lived a life as a man, even though they're a woman now. And so that helps their understanding. It was, I guess the series is an exploration for me. It's a lot of things that I've been wondering about lately. Lately, there's been a lot. For the first time, our trans community has become much more visible. They've stepped out of the shadows and said, I want a place at the table too. And they're very diverse. even within the trans community, they're all very diverse people. And I just wanted to say it's not all simple. We're all complex souls. It's not as simple as boy, girl.
Sometimes looking at like the news and hearing all these phrases and identities that we're not familiar with, things like gender fluid, which I joke is like something that you need to go to a mechanic for. But when I was coming out, and I'm 38, so when I was coming out, I was in my late teens, early 20s, and I didn't quite fit the binary of butch and femme, and the other, or the obligatory androgyny if you're on college campus. And I didn't really find something that fit me. And I think that if I had grown up now, that there would be options that I could find that were closer to how I felt about myself, which just weren't possible. Like I remember getting a lot of different heat. Like if, you can't be butch because you'll wear heels, you can't be femme because you're this, you can't be that. And so like having that, those options out there are exciting and confusing.
Yeah. I think that several generations in the future, a lot of this stuff won't even matter. We won't even look for labels that, and I label myself. I think I'm 100% lesbian. I have a lot of guy friends. I love the guys I work with, but I've never been able to emotionally attach to a guy in a sexual way, in a way that, I'd want to live with him and have a guy as a lover. I've just never made that emotional connection. But I think that, in the future, people are just going to be who they are, which means that if you don't have to wear a label, then there'll be a lot less flocking together, looking for where you fit in, looking for other people like you, because right now we feel like we have to be with people who are like us to affirm that we're okay, like we are. You know what I mean? That I prefer to hang out with other lesbians or at least bisexual, other people that are okay. I have straight friends, but I can't say that I spend a lot of time like going out with a group of other women where I'm the only lesbian. I don't.
It's not in your comfort zone. I have a question. Did you find writing romance within fantasy different than writing traditional romance?
Not really. Not really. It gave me a little bit of a chance to have a wider cast of characters, so that I was able to have some more secondary characters who were not same sex. I have at least one heterosexual couple in there that becomes even more prominent in the second book, but they're still secondary characters. My main characters will always be lesbian because that's my audience, and that's the romance that I write. Because that's what I feel. But I think I was able to relax a little bit, and one of my characters is intersex or third gender, however you want to call it, born with ambiguous genitalia, and I explore that a little bit in the first book. I was going to in the second book, but the second book got really, really long, and we ended up trimming. Some of that ended up being trimmed out, some scenes that I wrote for that couple. But the second book, the first book is kind of pretty black and white, good and evil. And the second book takes some real twists, and the good guys find out that they've got a few lessons to learn too. And the bad guys who exactly is the bad guy gets kind of fuzzy too. So the second book, everything's not so black and white.
It seems that one of the things that you've addressed in your book is the desire for roots. Because if you're in a culture where the norm is reincarnation, to be born and have no recollection of the past or have a past life to go to, you kind of feel a little unmoored. And it's, it almost kind of, in a way, it made sense. He's like, I don't have any memories before I was a toddler. This must be bullshit. And, the reason why all these natural disasters are happening is because we're not heeding the one God. And what's interesting is by having a collective, it's very inclusive, but also when you have a diverse collective, sometimes it's hard to figure out who you are and what your roots are and like what your place in the world is, I guess.
Yes, and not everybody. And desperate times make people desperate, and they begin to question what they do believe, and they're looking for answers, something that they can, and their faith can be shaken, and in this instance, the people who are still fairly young souls and don't have any recollection of their previous lives, their faith is in the collective is shaken when bad things start happening, and so they are vulnerable to somebody else who says, I've got the real answer. Mm-hmm. It's not this, these people are just feeding you a line.
Before I got deeper into the world that you had created, it almost like the nowness of us, my present self was like, wow, people, not that reincarnation is wrong, but having that, it almost felt like this blind faith in like the collective, in the same way that some people see books that are driven by Christian faith, that they have blind faith, because his son died. And like he's trying his best to revive him, but there's no reviving him. And people trying to comfort him, go, oh, don't worry, he's going on into the next life, everything is going to be fine. And he's like, this is not fine. My child is dead, Right. And I think his frustration at not, obviously not getting the promotion, feeling the poor guy emasculated by his powerful wife, but also not being a believer in a community of believers, and he just felt like he was on the outside. And he's like, "This is not cool. This is not right." So, when you read the first the prologue, you think, okay, the good v evil is going to be related to maybe the collective is what's going to be evil, and that's not what comes to pass.
Well, it gets really fuzzy in the second book, and then the third book. I haven't plotted it out, but it's going to get down to what I think is the root cause of most of the conflict in our society, and which is basically men's. And I don't mean men as in male. I'm talking mankind. I'm using that as a generic term. And society's need for power and control. Why can't we all just live together and be nicer? Mm-hmm. I'm very frustrated with the fact that people aren't nice anymore. Being the Southerner that I am, I just think people need to have better manners. We've come to have the things that people say to each other and on television. And, I believe in freedom of speech. I'm a journalist. I believe in freedom of speech, but I also believe in being civil. In civil discourse, and we don't have that anymore. Rarely have that anymore, and so I think that's part of what this trilogy is. My Watership Down. This is my social comment. When I finish it, I've had my say. Mm-hmm.
Watership Down is a book for those of you who don't know. It's something that, I've seen it, I've read it, and I've watched the film. So if you want to know what she means by that, you can go to your local library and check out Watership Down.
I always been a fan of fantasy. When I was in college, I took a whole college course on J.R.R. Tolkien, on Lord of the Rings, way before the movies were ever made. The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And when I was in high school, I read C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia, and the Screw Tape Letters. And I've always been, in most fantasy, always has some social commentary behind it, from the author, if you look deep enough for it. And I think that's why a lot of authors write in fantasy, that besides the fact that it's fun, and you get to, the good versus evil, it's very idealistic kind of thing, and you can have fantastical things like dragon horses in there that are really cool. That's why I decided to try my hand at it. And as soon as I finish the trilogy, I'm done. Going back to romance. In fact,
you're like, this is exhausting creating it.
It's really.
Well, when you're creating a reality separate, it still has a social commentary, but when you're creating your own reality, you have to keep, it's almost like being in the water. You have to keep swimming. You can't stand. You have to keep moving. So because you've mentioned book 2 a few times, I thought before our time together closes that my listeners would enjoy hearing you read an excerpt from it.
Okay. I read a short excerpt when I was in P-Town a few weeks ago. This is from Tracker and the Spy. The two main characters are Captain Tanisha of the Collective Guard, or TAN, as she's called for short, and Kyle, who is actually the daughter of the bad guy in the first book, Cyrus, but she is also a pyro, and she got there too late to make the dragon horse bonding, so she's not bonded to a dragon horse, but she wants to be, and she is just hooked up with the dragon horse army, joined up with them. And she knows one of the other members of the guard because he lived in her community, and he was in the prologue, Vircho. And this is a scene where they go up to the meadow and they're going to fly back to the dragon horse camp, and it's going to be Kyle's first time ever on a dragon horse. She's going to fly. She's going to ride double with Vircho and fly for the first time on a dragon horse.
Ooh, cool.
So, and it's a little bit of mayhem. The dragon horses are behaving badly. Oh, and the other thing is, if anybody's listening that has read the first book, it's a little bit confusing when I'm reading to refer to Danielle is mostly referred to as second because she's the second warrior, second in command. But I'm going to refer to her as Danielle in this reading because when you're listening and not reading, if I call her second, it gets confusing to listen to. I'll call her Danielle. Kyle stood next to Vircho and thought her heart would burst as 5 lean dragon horses, wings spread like great birds of prey, drifted downward in the twilight. Vircho murmured their names to her as 4 of them touched down: Spectre, Titan, Azar, Bureau. And Kyle imagined calling one of those beautiful beasts to her side, pressing her forehead to the ridged head to share thoughts, and launching skyward to ride the wind. Spectre, ghostly in the moonlight, pressed his forehead to Jael's. Titan, a dusky buckskin, danced his last steps to Danielle, and Vircho's Azar, a shimmering silver dapple, touched down lightly next to them. Diego's black, Bureau, landed with a snort and jerked his head impatiently. He moved away when Diego stepped towards him. Diego cursed. Tan stood apart from the rest, watching Pharaoh's circle overhead. "Call her in, Tan," Jael said. "I'm trying." Fists clenched at her side, Tan didn't take her eyes from the circling animal. "Get down here, you daughter of a dung-eater, or I'll send your wings from here." Pharaoh lifted her head and screamed into the night, spewing a column of flame. Kyle was fascinated. What happened when a warrior couldn't control her dragon horse? Another scream sounded so close that Kyle's ears rang with it, and Bureau launched into the sky. Bureau, get back here, you black devil. Diego might as well have been talking to the wind. Oh, this isn't good, Furcho muttered. What's happening? Kyle didn't know anything about dragon horse armies, but it looked like the beasts were breaking rank. The words were barely off her tongue when Spectre launched into the sky and JL's curses rang across the meadow. Guard, hold your bonded. Danielle's command was unnecessary since only she and Furcho still had their dragon horses at their sides. The moon hid behind a blanket of clouds as the dark night lit up and a burst of fireballs sparking like strobe lights. The 3 dragon horses appeared in different positions with each flash. It was impossible to tell who was attacking whom. Phyros. Kyle blinked. She needed to protect Phyros. Where was that coming from? JL stood ramrod straight, her focus intent on Spectre's dodging, darting form. Tan, too, watched the sky, but paced restlessly. Phyros has gone into season, she said. Your bitch better not hurt Bureau. This is all her fault. Diego shoved Tan hard, then grabbed his hip as if something unseen had struck him. He whirled on JL. Spectre, son of a dung beetle. JL turned to him, her hard stare immobilizing Tan and Diego where they stood. Danielle grabbed them both by their collars and shook them. This was the elite guard of the collective? Kyle had seen a schoolyard brawl that was less chaotic. Bureau landed heavily next to them, a swath of scorched hide on his hip, and a portion of his tail burned away. Diego swore again. JL's gaze went back to Spectre's shimmering figure in the night sky. Danielle, you and Furcho escort Diego to the main camp before Spectre decides to singe off the rest of Bureau's tail. Her order was curt, but when she glanced at Tan, her tone softened a bit. I think if the rest of you clear out, we can get Phyros under control and back to the main camp, where we can confine her until her heat is over. Kyle started at the choked sound that came from Tan, but the enigmatic warrior had turned away. For the first time, she wished she was more than a pyro, that she was also a telepath, so she could hear what was going on inside Tan's head. As you command, Furcho said, thumping his right fist to his left shoulder in salute. He clapped his hand on Kyle's shoulder. Ready for your first flight? So, the dragon horses are kind of carrying on there. Things are getting a little crazy. They're in the middle of a war, and Phyros is causing a lot of havoc in the ranks.
In your personal life, you love horses. Do you have a time when you have seen horses break rank and misbehave?
Oh, when a mare is in heat, you just can't. My favorite horse that I had the longest, he was Arabian. He was gelded, but somebody forgot to tell him. He was quite the ladies' man. And he would, any mare that was in season, he would court them. In fact, other people would laugh because he would sidle up to them and he would actually lick their withers and rub up against them. I mean, he would sweet talk. And he would mount them in a minute. So yeah, anytime a mare is in season, if there's any stains around, it's just habit. That's why I never owned a mare. I always owned geldings.
Because it's less drama to deal with?
Yeah, it's a lot less drama. It's a lot less drama to deal with. So, and of course, these dragon horses are bonded to their warriors. So with Phyros in heat, this is obviously is going to affect Tan. And so this is the first half of the book. This second book has a lot more sex in it than the first book did, which had very little. But there's also more fighting, and there's more characters are killed or die, and it has a cliffhanger at the end. And it's 90,000 words, so it's long. That's edited down to 90,000 words. And it goes to the printer. in December and will be released in February.
So, as my final question for you, how has your romance audience experienced this change into fantasy? Have they come along with you?
I think that most of them have. Now, some people are just not going to read fantasy, but I've been surprised that when I sell books at Pride events, I've had quite a few that have bought it. Of course, they like the first book. The second book still has the two main characters. There's still a romance between them. So you could say this is a romantic intrigue. You could call it fantasy. You can call it romantic intrigue. You can call it romance. It's because it's all of those things. And I'll always write romance because I'm a hopeless romantic.
Aww.
And that's what I like to read, so it's what I like to write too.
And, I imagine that you've expanded the horizons of some folks who, because there's some, like I read all genres as a person and also for my show, so I'm open to it. But there are other genres that people kind of shy away from, and fantasy, sci-fi, and even historical fiction. People will make assumptions, historical fiction snore. And I'm like, you've just not been reading the right historical fiction. So I can imagine the Dragon Horse trilogy sparking up some new fantasy fans.
I'm sure. I'm sure I've gained a few people that read fantasy and won't read romance. It's just like when I tell people I write in equestrian romances in equestrian settings. I've had some people say, "Well, I don't read romances, but I'll read just about anything that's got horses in it." And then I have people that say, "I don't know anything about horses and don't care about them, but I read romances." And so I just write what I like, and then hope that enough people out there like them. I have to say, I don't think the fantasies sell quite as well as, I've written 6 pure romances, and so I've gotten a pretty good reputation for writing those and have a really good audience for those. The Every Second Counts sold really, really well. Mm-hmm. And I haven't, even the romance that came out after that, Homely Forever, which was a Lambda finalist, hasn't equaled the sales that I had with Every Second Counts.
Wow. What are some thoughts you'd like to leave my listeners with before we go?
I believe that passion is important in life. And if you live your life without passion, you're really missing out. And I say that to the people that turn their noses up at romance writers, romance novels. I believe that you should be passionate about something. If it's not about a lover, then you should be passionate about something in your life. And that's what I've got to say about
I'm
life.
hoping that one day when somebody asks you, what do you write, and you say lesbian and romance, they don't go like, oh, because like the romance novels, romance in general, no matter what genre, is the all-time best-selling by far than any other genre that there is. And so, like, I hope one day it's not a guilty pleasure, that somebody doesn't have to hide, their paperback, whatever the cover looks like. And that I think sometimes emotion, things that are driven by emotion, and especially emotion of women, has been dismissed as, not something of value. Whereas I think, who you love, the things that you need to conquer in order to be with that person, or parts of yourself that you have to experience with that person, those are important things. And I do hope one day that the stigma is gone.
I agree with you 100%. I always, I've had people tell me, I want to write a book that makes people think. And I tell them, I want to write a book that makes people feel.
Yes. And they're not mutually exclusive. You can make somebody think, and you can make somebody feel. I regret that people look down on romances. I mean, obviously there's stuff that is, bubblegum pop, it's not of substance, but that's just not the case anymore. And if you've been reading lesbian fiction over the decades, there's been a huge shift in what the romances are like. They are fully fleshed characters. They're complex books with, subplots and a lot of other things going on. And they are strong romances. And so that's my hope, that there'll be respect for a genre. I think people are just looking backwards. They're thinking of Harlequin and all, the trashy novels, from decades ago, and they don't see it possible to have a smart, complex, fascinating romance novel.
Yeah, when people tell me I should be writing something else, I tell them, well, you go ahead and write the book you want to. If you think that's what people should be writing, you go ahead and write it. Yeah, I write for pleasure.
It's like, you don't get to determine how I play with my jacks.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I want to give you a big thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and I love that you're putting something out there as, thoughtful and complex as Dragon Horse Trilogy, and also, given one for the romance as well.
Thanks, Liz.